Okay, let's go ahead and start, Maria. If you'd like to stop sharing your screen, and let's go ahead.
So we start.
Yep.
So hi everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion hosted by Incubate. So the session is being recorded and we will share it with you early next week. I'm Francine and I will be today's moderator. I'm an immigration solution specialist at Incubate since 2020 and I'm currently based in Lebanon. The purpose of this Q&A session is to answer your questions about Canada's immigration. We have received a lot of interesting questions during the past week, and today's plan is to cover most of those questions. And towards the end of the session, we will take any question you might have. So you can type it on the chat box, or you can directly ask it. Just raise your hand. On Zoom, there's a button for that, and we can unmute you. But if we run out of time, we will just try to schedule a follow-up session in the coming few weeks, or you can visit our website and get in touch with us on www.incubate.ca, and we will be more than happy to assist you. Now, before we start the session, I would like to introduce you our panelists and our company. So Maria, our first panelist, is also an immigration solution specialist. She has been with us since 2019 and is currently based in Vancouver. With her extensive knowledge and experience, she finds many of the immigration pathways that fit each person's profile. Basil is our second panelist and is the managing director of Incubate. He is currently based in Toronto. He is our licensed principal consultant. Now, Incubate is obviously our company. It's an immigration services firm that was established in 2013. It's licensed under the federal government of Canada and the government of Quebec, and is a member in good standing. It has 3 offices in Canada, in Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal. Now, for the past 8 years, our team has processed thousands of immigration and visa applications, and our team has been growing since then and comes from different countries and backgrounds. But one of the things that we do have in common is that we all apply to immigrate to Canada. So this is why we understand what it's like to go through the process from A to Z. And now it's time to start with the questions and answers. The aim today is mainly to cover as much questions as possible. So here we go. First question, Maria, this is addressed to you. Is an intermediate level of English or French enough to apply for immigration?
Thank you, Francine. Great question. We get this quite a lot. And as most of you may know, both French and English are official languages in Canada, but this does not mean that you need to speak both in order to immigrate. It's true that it's quite crucial to speak one of the official languages if you would like to immigrate through an economic or through the economic class. But it's not always mandatory to have, or let's say not everyone needs to score the same level. So it will all depend on the other factors that we can demonstrate, such as your work experience, your level of education, whether you have family in Canada, previous experience in Canada, and a few more factors. But generally speaking, we see on the profiles that we see in our clients that at least an upper intermediate or advanced level, it's requiring one of the languages. Again, at a federal level, so if we're talking about express entry, both languages can be used as the main language. Whereas if we are talking about immigrating through Quebec, French would be more the mandatory language here. But to wrap up the answer and address that question, intermediate level would be almost a must for most economic programs and also provincial programs, but preferably an advanced level, a CLB 9 level.
Thank you, Maria. Basil, what documents will someone need to include in their application to Ircc?
Thanks, Francine. So the factors that Maria was discussing, language, work experience, age, education level, family status, if you're married or if you have a common law partner and such, financials, each one of those factors have to be demonstrated through documents. Now, the Canadian immigration system is a bit different than the US and other countries. It's based on an administrative review procedures where everything is based on the documents that you submit. There's no interview process with an immigration officer. You don't have to go to the embassy and present yourself in front of an officer and have a discussion. So it is imperative that you make sure that all the information that you submit in your application and the documents that you also include as evidence, you do as much as you can to meet not only the requirements, but also show the officer that you have enough evidence to support your argument, because you're not going to ever be able to speak to the officer in person. So you need to make sure that your documents are organized, your documents are comprehensive, your documents make sense, and they have a flow. So my answer to that question is, of course, is the documents vary from one person to another, right? Sure, you have to have a copy of your language exam report, your ECA or educational credential assessment report, your degrees, your certificates for your education, your transcripts as well, your letter of employment from every job that you've held in the past 10 years. If you're applying from inside Canada, then under CEC it's 5 years. Your pay stubs, pay slips, employment contracts, salary deposits, bank statements, etc., right? So all these different documents would be used in different categories of your application to demonstrate each one on its own. But what's more important than just submitting these documents is to submit them the right way. There's a lot of challenges that we've seen where you have 200 pages that you want to include in an exhibit, but because of the online procedures that Ircc has, you're limited to only 4 megabytes, and you're trying to scan things and compress things and redo things. What documents do I include and what documents do I not include? Which ones am I going to have? Which ones can I get rid of? I'm unable to give the government everything that I need. So which ones do I dismiss, right? So this changes person to person. The checklist, there is a default one, but based on your personal circumstances, you need to include certain documents that are specific to your case and your own personal circumstances.
Thank you, Basil. Maria, this is my favorite question. What is the best, fastest, and easiest and most guaranteed way to get my PR? If you know, please let me know.
You're right, Francine. We get this question, I would say, every day, mainly in our consultations as well. And unfortunately, I don't have a straight answer for it. And as some of you may know or may heard, and most of what we will be covering today is that there's no right program, or there's no just one pathway for everyone. As Basil was just mentioning, it is really dependent on your circumstances. Just like we tailor a document checklist for your case, we also tailor a solution for your circumstances to come to Canada. So there are, as of today, well, besides two systems that select candidates, one is through the federal government through Express Entry, and another one through the government of Quebec. There's also multiple provincial programs. There also we have the family class. So it really depends on your circumstances. Starting with addressing the first word here, which is the best. There's no such a thing such as best in immigration, because what may have worked best for a friend or your cousin to immigrate to Canada may not work for you due to, let's say, her experience. What if she has experience in one occupation that's currently in demand and that's why she got selected? That was the best for her profile. But if you do not have that expertise, if you don't have that experience, it definitely won't work for you. So that's why we believe it's very important to look at this question case by case, address all the different factors that you can demonstrate. Some of them we mentioned already: age, work experience, level of education, and languages, and see what works for you. As I said, there's many programs available. As far as I'm concerned, over 60 provincial programs that are active as of today. And each province has its own needs. So again, what may have worked for somewhere may not work for you. Now, fastest. This one's a tricky one because there's, well, as most of you may know, COVID has presented some delays in immigration to Canada, definitely. But if we were to speak into, processing times before COVID, Express Entry, we could have agreed that it was the fastest processing time if we were to compare it with, for instance, adding a provincial nomination or going under the family class through a spousal sponsorship. So processing times now have changed because of COVID. So there's we cannot really compare as of today, but it will all depend. And I don't want you to think about processing times from the government. I want you to think about how long is it going to take you to achieve the score that you need to get selected, or how long is it going to take you to achieve the requirements and meet the requirements for that specific program. So we have to check whether you have your language tests up to date, if you have done them, and if you've met the required level for that specific program or that specific score, whether you have your foreign degrees equalized, just like what Basa was mentioning through the ECA, and so on. So in terms of times, I would like to refer back to what I was just mentioning, which is it really depends on the program that you may go under because of your circumstances. So maybe a provincial program works for you because of your, let's say, age or your previous work experience, and that may end up being the fastest route for you to get selected and apply for immigration. ECS, there's no really such a solution as easy. There's no one size fits all in immigration, not at all. And it's definitely not easy. Most of the economic programs that we see work on a selection basis, meaning that you need to meet the requirements and in most cases a specific score in order to get selected. There's no such a thing anymore where you complete an eligibility criteria and submit your application and the government will review it. No, you actually have to be invited in order to apply for immigration. So again, going back to meeting the requirements and the factors of age, languages, work experience, and education. And guaranteed, that's actually my favorite. There's never a guarantee with immigration, and whoever tells you that, run away from that person, because it's actually, there's no such a thing, right? What we can guarantee is guiding you, preparing a solid and strong application, but no one can never guarantee because you meet these requirements, you're gonna get selected and you're gonna get your permanent residence through this program. So please be very careful whenever you see ads out there or anyone is telling you you'll get for sure your PR, because at the end of the day, even if you meet all the requirements, it's up to the discretion of the officer to approve that application. So be very careful with that. Of course, you would have a higher chance if we meet all the requirements and everything is in place, knowing admissibility that we can see, but never, 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 it's guaranteed.
Thank you, Maria.
Yeah.
Basil, how can a person demonstrate financial through bank accounts?
So
mainly if they cannot demonstrate their financials through the bank statements.
So before answering that question, we need to understand why that question is being asked. Obviously, this is something a lot of people think that, well, why do I need to show you how much money do I have, right? I'm going to immigrate after 1 or 2 years. Let's look at the immigration law. So that immigration law says, if you're applying under the federal skilled worker program, or known as FSW, you have to show that you have enough savings based on your family size, 1, 2, 3, 10 people, which includes you, your spouse, and your children. And these savings, you're not really spending it. You're not really giving it to the Canadian government. You're not really, you're just showing that you have this money. And this money has been obtained from a legal source. And then once you come to Canada, once you immigrate to Canada, you're going to be bringing this money with. Now, let's assume your family size is 2, it's just you and your spouse. You have to show 16,000 Canadian dollars. What the government wants you to show is a bank statement for 6 months to show that there are no large deposits, to show that this money was not borrowed, to show that this money actually has been with you and is still with you. The mistake a lot of people do is they make a large deposit of $20,000, get a bank statement, and then their balance will be very low, and then suddenly it spikes up to $20,000, $30,000 to get a bank statement, and they show it to the government. The government is like, well, hold on, time out. Where did this money come from? Did you just take it from your parents, deposit it, give me a bank statement, and then the next morning you took the money out? Because that's misrepresentation. That is you lying to the Canadian government, telling them, yes, I have this money, but really you don't. You just borrowed it and you're trying to make the Canadian government feel that you have this money, but in reality you don't. So here you need to be careful. 6-month statement with no large deposits is what you're supposed to show. Now, I'm going to use Lebanon as an example. So in Lebanon right now, there are a financial crisis, the banks, they're forcing you to do certain exchange rates, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you cannot demonstrate that your money is sitting in a bank account for 6 months, let's say. This is what's most ideal. Now, if you don't, you need to show the source of funds. So let's say a year ago, you went to a bank, you said, I'm done with you, you took your money out and you withdrew that money. So you have a withdrawal receipt for a certain amount. Then let's say that money has been sitting with you as cash. Now you cannot demonstrate cash to your in your PR application. So you must open up a bank account. This bank account does not have to be in the country where you're at. So it doesn't have to be, let's say, Lebanon. It can be in Dubai, it can be in Canada. There are certain Canadian banks that allow you to open up something called pre-arrival bank account. And you hold that for 8 months to 1 year. You make one large deposit, you keep the money there, you get your bank statements, and then the bank tells you, okay, after arriving in Canada, you can then present yourself with your ID at one of our branches to finalize the activation, the full activation of your account, and it's good. And then you proceed. And if you don't show up, then they'll force you to take your money back. So there are certain solutions you can follow to get these bank statements, but you must have a bank statement. If it's not for 6 months, you need to explain the source of funds. So like I was saying, when you cashed in your money a year ago, you have to redeposit it in an account. Currency doesn't matter, right? So it can be in Canadian dollars, US dollars, your local currency, Lebanese liras. There's no requirement in the currency that you need to hold it in. And then you need to explain any large deposit that was done if the bank statement is less than 6 months. But remember, this is mainly for the Federal Skilled Worker Program. If you're planning to come to Canada first on a study permit or a work permit or a different kind of visa on temporary status, and then gain Canadian work experience, and then apply for immigration under the CEC program, the Canadian Experience Class, there's no financial requirements for that, meaning you don't even have to demonstrate your financials. So we have actually some clients who opted in to first come to Canada to study and work, and then get Canadian experience and apply from inside Canada to bypass the restrictions of showing your financials. Right? So again, like Maria was saying earlier, this is a case-by-case basis. We can look into your circumstances and advise you. But so far, we have not encountered any main challenges with our clients. And we've heard certain things from clients from Lebanon about, nobody accepts bank statements from Lebanon, for an example. That's not true. right? Local problems have nothing to do with the Canadian government. Remember, the government says, show me that you have these savings. And whatever the value is going to be based on the Central Bank of Canada, not what the bank is forcing you to take your money out, because technically you won't be really taking this money out for another 2 years. Okay.
Thank you. Maria, what is the best program to apply through for couples?
Going back to that, what's best? Thank you, Francine. So just a little bit, a reminder here, there's no really a solid answer here, but I can walk you through what we see with our clients, and should I apply with my spouse or should he or she come later? Okay, so talking or focusing on express entry, which is probably what a lot of you are familiarized with, selection system that manages and selects candidates for the different programs under express entry. Again, factors we're taking into consideration: age, work experience, education, and languages. There's additional factors, but these are the core ones. You're giving a certain score, or you're giving a score over 600 points if you're not being nominated for a provincial program, or you have not received a certificate of nomination. And you are responsible, applying on your own, let's say a single person, or even a married person that does not want, or whose family is not accompanying to Canada. You're responsible for meeting the 600 points with these factors that I just mentioned. Of course, you can add the Canadian experience you might have, sibling in Canada, and so on. Now, if we were to look into this same scenario and add a spouse, whether that's your wife or your husband, this person coming in is responsible for 50 points. So the principal applicant would be then responsible for 550, and the upcoming or the coming spouse for 50 points. Now, what this means is that the factors that the spouse can help with in terms of points are level of education, languages, and having experience in Canada, or education in Canada. But the main factors that we look at, given the profiles of our clients, are level of education and level of languages. So when we talk about applying as couples through the economic class, and specifically here in express entry, the way that the partner or your spouse brings is in terms of education and languages, and of course if they had previous experience and education in Canada. Now, the best program, then this would differ, because then we can also talk about a little bit the family class, specifically the spousal sponsorship. If your spouse or common law partner were to be a Canadian citizen or permanent resident, he or she would be able to sponsor to come to Canada. But again, the factors here or the circumstances here are completely different than in the economic class. So to summarize this, when we're planning to immigrate to Canada and you're coming as a family, as a couple, it's important to look, if we are talking about express entry, to the overall score breakdown and see what each of you should achieve in terms of these factors, so languages and education, to see whether your combined score could get you to that selection score that the government or the draws are currently having. I'm not sure if Basil, you want to add anything to there?
Sure. Again, remember on your personal circumstances as a family, right? Coming as a couple to Canada on temporary status before applying to immigration is actually a very interesting way to immigrate. Mm-hmm. So what Maria was talking about is a couple who's interested to immigrate to Canada and just want to apply for immigration.
Outside.
But there's another potential pathway where the couple can come to Canada first to study, to work, right? There's a really neat program in Canada called OWP, or the Open Work Permit for spouses. So if somebody's coming to Canada to study, the spouse can get an open work permit, or somebody's coming here on a work permit. Again, the spouse can can get an open work permit. And if somebody's coming here to study and after they graduate, there's something called PGWP or post-graduation work permit. Again, based on that, the spouse can also get an OWP or open work permit. So think about it this way. A couple comes to Canada, one is studying, working part-time, one is working full-time, and then graduation happens, post-graduation work permit gets issued and an open work permit extension gets issued. So that potentially can be a 5-year plan, right? What's nice about this plan is the speed of the application, right? You're looking at a few weeks or few months to get these permits processed versus immigration. Well, unfortunately, right now, there's a huge backlog of many, many months that you have to wait. So to add to what Maria was saying is, sure, you can think about that when it comes to immigration, but you can also take advantage of the fact that you as a couple can come to Canada and together work on achieving certain requirements for immigration using your temporary resident status, not just immigration. So that's where couples actually have a competitive advantage versus somebody else who doesn't have a spouse. And I also remember that the definition of spouse is not just marriage. Canada also has something called common law partners. Common law partners are people who they don't have legal marriage, but they've been physically living together for 12 months and can demonstrate that through documents.
Thank you. Basil, what happens if I get pregnant while my PR application is in process, since we're talking about couples? So,
right. So this question really didn't exist much before COVID because the processing time was very fast, right? So express entry used to be, well, the government used to say it's 80% of all applications get processed in 6 months or less, which they really did a good job at keeping that. Few extra weeks delay here and there. I mean, we hardly saw anything taking more than 1 year in the past. But now, because of the backlogs and the way that the government's trying to recover from all the COVID effects, you're not expecting 6 months anymore, and you're not expecting a year. It might potentially be a lot more than that. Well, you can't really freeze your entire life and wait for your PR application. So you're living your normal life, right? If you have a partner and you do get pregnant, right? When you get pregnant, or when you have not delivered the baby yet, you don't really need to report that to the government. You don't really need to change your circumstances because your family size is still the same. But the moment the baby is born, depends on what stage your application is in, you need to report that to the government, and you need to be very careful, because if the application is still in progress, life is good. You submit a web form, you inform the government, hey, listen, now we have an extra family member. You would upload the passport copy and the passport copy and the birth certificate of the baby. The government now knows that this person exists. The government will issue something called an RFI, or request for information. And this RFI allows you to then submit a PR application for your baby. Meaning you have to submit the PR application, the baby is going to have to get examined, take a medical test and all that fun stuff. And then you're actually adding an extra person to the application, which could potentially, you might encounter some delays because now everything needs to be redone. Now, that's really not going to affect your points in terms of express entry, let's say, because like the baby doesn't really hold any factors when it comes to your total overall CRS score, or the comprehensive ranking score. But your financials will change, because now you have to meet 3. So if you had $16,000 in the beginning that you reported to the Canadian government, and then now your family size is, let's say, 3, and now you have to show, let's say, 19,000, you actually have to include more financials and more savings and demonstrate that you can support 3 family members. Okay, so this is if the application is in progress. The issue is when, let's assume you're pregnant, your PR application is approved, you get your COPR, your confirmation of permanent residence, and then the baby's born. this is where it becomes a bit iffy, because technically you cannot add a baby to an existing application because the application is already closed. So suddenly you actually have to sponsor your child for permanent residency. So it's not adding a baby to a child to an application, you're actually sponsoring the child, meaning you can potentially, need to apply for a TRV, temporary resident visa application, for the baby to come with you to Canada, for you to be able to complete your landing process, and then do a sponsorship application under the family cost of your child. So it becomes it's a different process when it comes to that. So it depends on what level of your PR application that you're in.
Thank you. Maria, if I am over the age of 40, do I have any chances to immigrate to Canada?
Thank you, Francine. Yeah, I mean, this is a tricky one. I get this a lot in consultations, and you know, when a client is at or over that age, they already come into the consultation quite discouraged in that sense, like, oh, I've heard if I'm over 30, I have no chances. What do I do? And to tell you the truth, it's not over. The game is not over. You still have chances, but it is true that you have to compensate for the points you lost for age. And again, I'm talking about this from the perspective of express entry, where you are assessed for your factors for a specific score, the CRS score that Basil was just mentioning. So once we turn 30, we start losing 5 points for every year we turn. And once we reach the age of 40, we start losing 10 points. Again, this does not mean that because you're 40, you won't have any chances to express entry because you won't reach the selected score. What it really means is that the points that you've lost for your age, you'll have to compensate through other factors like your languages, potentially having, and if you already have an advanced level of English, potentially achieving an upper intermediate level of French, because that will push that score, or having a previous work experience in Canada, coming through a work permit under one of the LMI exemptions. So there are really, there's a lot of combinations that we can play with for this score and to balance for the points we lost for each. This is again for express entry. What's very interesting is that a lot of provincial programs do not look at age as a determining factor. So if we're considering, for instance, applying through Ontario, their job offer for foreign workers, they don't look at the age when assessing your application or assessing your profile. Instead, they look at the factors that the province considers important when it comes to selecting immigration. So what skill job is your job offer based on? How much are you gonna get paid every year? On what sector are you going to be working? So they focus on these specific factors that are important for the province, and our age does not become a problem in that sense, or does not put us at the bottom of the selection list. So it's very interesting to look at provincial programs, whether that is through having work experience in a specific job, or having a job offer from a Canadian employer, or coming first through studies and applying through one of the international graduate streams. So as we've been mentioning for the past answers, it's really case by case. It depends on your circumstances. It's true that express entry penalizes your score for being above 30, but it does not mean that you have no more opportunities to immigrate to Canada. There's a lot of programs out there that could work for your case.
So yeah, it's never a yes or a no. There's
exactly. There's always there's always some sort of solution we can find for every case, for sure.
Basil, someone asked if I am engaged to my fiance, should we get married now before I apply to immigrate, or after I get approved?
Okay. So this is it's a very interesting question, because when people are planning their immigration journey, and they usually want to support each other. Let's say they're dating or they're engaged and they have marriage plans, and they're like, hey, listen, we're moving to Canada. Should we get married now and then apply for immigration together? Or should we go to Canada and then we get married there? Or should one of us apply and then we get married throughout the entire application process and add the spouse to the application? So you have 3 different ways to do this. Now, you need to be very careful, because whenever you apply, let's say through the express entry system, and like what Maria was saying earlier, as a principal applicant, you don't have a spouse, you get your, let's say, 480 points. Now you are eligible for an ITA, an invitation to apply, because let's say the draw that you went under was 470 points. And then after you get your invitation to apply, you got married. Well, the moment you got married, you must disclose your spouse. Immediately, your score goes down 50 points. Unless you start taking the circumstances of your spouse, education, age, let's say, certain things, and then the 25 points and then the 50 points will come back. And if you don't have an ECA for your spouse, and if you don't have a language test for your spouse, suddenly your total score of 470 might drop to, let's say, 460, 455. And if 455 is under the ITA score that you got selected under or through, you become ineligible and your PR application is immediately refused because you did not meet the ITA conditions by adding your spouse. So you need to be very careful. You need to calculate your combined score and use the online CRS calculator to say, hey, listen, if I do add my spouse with my spouse's credentials, what is my score going to be as the principal applicant? Or should I switch? Should I make my spouse the principal applicant and I'm the accompanying family member? So all these things need to take place before you make any changes to your PR application. We always advise that you do this before coming to Canada. Reason for that is if you apply together or you applied as 2 individuals before getting married, and each one of you gets their PR process done on their own, that's great. Now, let's take the circumstance where you don't get married. One of you applies for immigration, gets their permanent residency, comes to Canada. And now this person is a permanent resident. Now they want to get married, they want to bring their spouse. So let's assume they actually do get married. If you do get married at that point, you can't just add your spouse to the application. You have to sponsor your spouse under something called the spousal sponsorship application, which is under family immigration. What's nice about that application is there's no language requirements, there's no education requirements, there's no work experience requirements. You just need to have a genuine marriage, genuine relationship, and demonstrate that through documentation. And this application process takes around 1 year. What's not nice about this application is, unless your spouse has a visa, unless your spouse has a TRV, a temporary resident visa, to be able to come to Canada and visit, so you can submit this spousal sponsorship application from inside Canada, your spouse might be outside and you're inside Canada as a permanent resident. And then the family is going to be disconnected for 1 year after you get married until your spouse gets PR status. So you need to be very careful with that move of trying to get your PR on your own and then letting your spouse join you. We have seen many cases where that's what happened. And then now they are actually in 2 separate countries for a year and they're unable to get a visit visa for the spouse to come and join it, and it becomes a bit of an inconvenience. So we always recommend to consult people like us and other law firms and other consulting firms that are actually licensed to do so, and get the right advice about your own personal circumstances before you make any moves, just so that you don't get stuck in this loophole of, now what do we do? And also, please understand that spousal sponsorship for permanent residents is different than spousal sponsorship for citizens. because as a permanent resident, the sponsor has to be physically be in Canada. So you can't be in Lebanon or be in Dubai or somewhere else and do the application there and come together. You can only do that if the sponsor is a Canadian citizen. Canadian citizen can start the process from inside or outside Canada, but a permanent resident must physically be inside Canada to sponsor. So be careful when it comes to.
Thank you, Basil. Thank you. Maria, actually, if someone hires a representative, is their PR guaranteed, and would it be processed faster?
Thank you, Francine. Just before I address that, I noticed that Manal has the hand raised. We will, once we're done with the questions that we received, we'll address or we'll open the option for attendees to write on the chat. So if you want to go ahead and write in the meantime, you'll be able to click send once we finish with our questions. But don't worry, we will make sure we address your questions. Perfect. Awesome. So I seem to get all the guaranteed, faster, what's best questions. But as I was mentioning earlier, there is no such a thing as guaranteed. And us as representatives, going back to what I said, whether it's us or any other representative, they can never promise you any results on your application, whether it's going to be as successful and a guarantee approval. Please, that's actually going against the law. So what we bring into your application, what we can do as consultants, as your representatives in the application, is make sure you're not missing anything in such important application. Making sure all the forms are filled in correctly. We know how tricky these forms can be sometimes, and some applications require quite a lot of forms, such as the spousal sponsorship one, family sponsorship in general. And also making sure that we gather the right documentation and we prepared the right documentation for your case to explain your circumstances, explanation letters, if needed, anything that has to do with financials. So all the documents that we'll need to prepare for the application, you can rest assured that we'll prepare that in a proper way that's expected as per IRCC's expectations in this sense. But it's never gonna be a guarantee of being processed faster. So submitting your application through a representative or on your own, it does not give you any expedited process, or it does not give you any first in line position when submitting an application. Now, of course, with our expertise and years of experience in the industry, we can also advise you on, what to highlight on your application, again, based on your specific circumstances. So at the end of the day, it comes to understanding your case and making sure we're making this or explaining to the officer, to IRCC, your circumstances, to make sure that they take this into consideration in your application. So we always tell our clients, you don't have to touch a form in the application. We know, again, how scary this can be sometimes. And of course, we'll advise you and guide you throughout the process. But please never, again, run from that person that tells you that I'll guarantee you that you'll get your permanent residence, because that's not up to that person, or whether he or she's a representative. It's up to the officer reviewing your application. I'm not sure, Basil, if you want to add anything to that.
Actually, I want to add two things. First thing is that actually there's a question that everybody should be asking themselves before they hire a representative. Why do I want to hire a representative? Right? Well, Maria, you just told us that, great. So if I hire, let's say, Incubate, or one of the consultants at Incubate, you guys are not going to guarantee my application. So what am I going to pay you for? I just pay you to fill forms? Well, no, that's not what you can do that on your own, right? And now everything is in an online application. What we see with our clients and other consultants and lawyers as well is you're investing into the peace of mind of knowing that somebody has experience, okay? Not just somebody who's licensed to do so. The licensing processes are so of course, very crucial, but also the experience of this person till you do this, don't do this. I advise you to do this, change that. And every single application that we've inherited, let's say when somebody starts their Express Entry profile on their own, and then that by the time they come to us and we're like, wait, hold on a second. Well, this is wrong and this is wrong. You shouldn't have done this, and this is not actually. Unfortunately, you have to reject the application to apply your receipt, and we have to redo your Express Entry process because this is technically could be held against you, and this is misrepresentation. No, so your expertise as a consultant is what people should be investing in. That's why most consultants and most lawyers, they get, their clients through referrals and personal referrals, right? Everybody looks nice online and ads and all that fun stuff, but at the end of the day, it's the practice that you do. The second part I also wanted to add is, what is the definition of a representative, right? A definition of a representative, a paid representative, is a Canadian lawyer or Canadian immigration consultant. And that's it. It's nothing else. There's no, oh, well, yeah, this lawyer in Lebanon is helping me. No, that person cannot receive any money to advise you or process applications for you. Same thing with your agency. Your agency cannot touch your application. Your agency can represent a consulting company, right, by connecting you with them, but that's what the role is. So be careful who you hire. What's really nice is just 3 days ago, the governing body of all consultants, immigration consultants in Canada, got converted from something called ICCRC to something called CICC, or the Canada Citizenship and Immigration College, or the College of. So CICC is the same unit or the same regulatory body as before, with enhanced powers. Now, the good news about this is the fact that now they can actually work with foreign governments to take legal action against unauthorized representatives and those who pretend that they can assist you. So I feel much better now telling our clients that there will be less immigration scams, less people taking money from you who are not authorized to do so, because of this huge change in law that now allows this government body, not government body, but self-regulation body to take certain actions on your behalf as a client. Okay, so two things. Why do you need to hire a representative? Always think about that. To be consulted, somebody to check your documents, somebody to guide you through, and who to consult or who to give your money to. Always refer to the registrar's list of consultants who can represent you in Canada.
Thank you, Basil.
Basil, how long do I need to live in Canada to apply for a Canadian passport?
Okay, this is an easy one. So when you apply for a permanent residency and you become a permanent resident, you get your PR card. It's valid for 5 years. Okay. Please do not mistake your PR card with your PR status. PR status is your status in Canada as a permanent resident. PR card is a document, it's a little card that allows you to travel in and out of the country. If your PR card is expired, it doesn't mean you lose your PR status. These two are not related. Now, imagine if you are inside Canada, have your PR status, your PR card expired, but you remain in Canada. Did you lose your PR status? Absolutely not, because you're here. Your PR status, your PR card only allows you to travel back and forth. Now, for you to maintain your permanent residency status in Canada, you have to live in Canada for 730 days out of every 5-year duration from the day that you want to, let's say, renew your PR card. But for you to become a Canadian citizen, you need to upgrade the 730 days to 1,095 days. So instead of 2 years, it's 3 years. So 3 years for citizenship, 2 years to renew your PR status. And that's physical presence, as in you cannot be located anywhere else outside, right? You cannot leave through the US and pretend that you're inside and have an address in Canada, or your cousin is maintaining your mailing address. You have to physically be inside the country, filing your taxes for 3 years out of the 5, and you must meet the physical presence requirements for both citizenship and PR status.
Physically and genuinely. Maria, another question. I have a visit visa to Canada that is still valid. Can I go there and figure things out after I move?
Great question. I love it. And nowadays, looking at the situation and how long it's taking for the federal government to issue invitations to express entry, we know the famous federal skilled worker program has not issued any invitations for almost a year now. And a lot of people would think that, well, if I come as a temporary resident, if I come as a visitor, how is that going to help me with immigration? And there's actually plenty of advantages to that, to having a valid visa to Canada that you can utilize to start your immigration process in Canada. So assuming that you first were to come as a visitor, we of course, planning ahead, we would look at what options based on your circumstances would you be able to switch to a potential student or a potential worker in Canada. I give you an example. There's an LMIA exemption code, C16, and an LMIA, just to briefly touch on this point, an LMIA, it stands for a labor market impact assessment, and it's pretty much the process of an employer, of a Canadian employer, demonstrating to the government that he or she has tried to hire someone in the local market, a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident, and has not been successful at it, and that's why he or she needs to hire a foreign national. So it's a typical process of employer sponsorship, right? Now, there are a list, quite a broad list of exemption codes that exempt the employer from demonstrating this to the government. And if a candidate meets certain requirements, he or she can directly apply for the work permit. The code that I'm specifically mentioning here, the C16, exempts the employer from an LMIA, or exempts the candidate from needing that positive LMIA if he or she speaks upper intermediate level of French and has accepted a job offer outside of Quebec in a qualified position. So let's put this into a practical example. Let's say you were to come in a couple months to Canada. As a visitor, you're going to conduct a couple interviews with Canadian employers. And again, as long as we meet the requirements of the job offer, you may still be in Canada and submit your application for a closed work permit. Now, this is temporarily, there's an exemption because of COVID for you to submit a work permit application inside Canada until March, I believe it's end of March next year, 2022. And this is great because it does not force you to leave the country and wait until a decision is made on your work permit. Instead, you can remain in Canada, wait for your application to be approved, and start working right away with your employer. This is not just only with this code, it's also with normal LMIAs and other employer-specific work permits. But I guess what I'm trying to say with this is that you may benefit from your temporary residence visa, from your temporary residence status, come to Canada, browse the market, browse the job market, potentially go to interviews while you are physically in here. Things are coming back to normal here. People are going back to the offices. Yes, there's still some online presence, but we're starting to see that we're coming back to pre-COVID somehow. So, and this also applies to studying. So you're actually eligible to apply for a study permit inside Canada if this is the route that works best for you. If you have a conditional letter of acceptance, for example, or you are coming to accompany your spouse as a worker, as a student. So there's a list of also exemptions that allow you to apply for study permit inside Canada and still benefit from that temporary status and transfer into a temporary residence status that will allow you to either study or work. Now, this would seem like a longer process towards immigration, but honestly speaking, looking at the draws that have been taking place and how federal skilled worker, how long it's taking, it may actually be the fastest route to come first temporarily, and work towards acquiring enough experience to go under the Canadian Experience class, or completing your degree or a master's to a program that will then allow you to apply for a provincial nomination, for instance. So you're working through your temporary residence towards applying later on for your permanent residence from inside Canada.
Thank you. Bassel, someone asked, my parents have their PR expired. They accumulated 1 year in Canada and went back to Lebanon. Is there a way to renew their PR, or we should apply from scratch?
Right. So here, again, that's more of a follow-up question to, how long do I need to live in Canada to maintain my status? So remember, PR expired, meaning PR card expired. You cannot lose your PR status unless somebody takes that away from you. And the only way for your PR status to be taken away from you is you either go to the immigration division and do a hearing at the appeal division, or you're outside Canada, an officer questions your PR status as you're trying to come back, and they say, hey, hold on, time out, prove to me that you meet the physical requirements of you being inside. Now, in this case, we would ask, how long have the parents have been outside Canada? How many times did they try to come back? What, why did they leave? The circumstances, et cetera, et cetera. Do they have any children? What happened to the children? Are the children still back in Canada and all that? Or it was one of those scenarios where, hey, you know what? My parents got a great job 10 years ago in Dubai. They just got their PR cards and they went back. And then we've all been living here, and now we're trying to find a way to get our PR status back. There is a process where you can apply for something called a travel document and go to Canada to present your case in front of the immigration appeal division and say, hey, listen, I'm going to explain to you what happened to me. But please understand, the second you apply for this travel document, you give the minister the power to question your PR status, meaning just by applying for your travel document, it doesn't really mean that the government is going to give you a travel document and you are going to be given an opportunity to go and attend a hearing. They might force you to do an online call over the phone instead of coming to Canada. They might actually ask you to voluntarily renounce your PR status because you really did not even try to stay in Canada. So there are different circumstances, best interest of the children, level of integration in the country, all these different things. So most cases, though, who really didn't put in effort to stay in Canada and they really did not spend much time, they unfortunately have to voluntarily renounce their PR status and then reapply again. If the children maintained their PR status or they became Canadian citizens, maybe the children can sponsor them, they get a super visa, or they go under the parents and the grandparents program, or they find different pathways to be able to get their PR status back. But the point that I'm trying to make is, just because your PR card is expired, it doesn't really mean you lost your PR status. These are two separate things.
Okay, thank you. Maria, what are the provinces that accept applications directly without expression of interest?
Great question. And great question, because there's a lot of programs, just like I was mentioning earlier, over 60 provincial active programs at the moment. So it can get a bit confusing, what's the process for this province and this other. And the funny thing is that some provinces have a blended process. So for some of their programs, like I'm going to put Ontario as an example, they may work directly with Express Entry, where they select their candidates directly from the Express Entry pool. And then other programs, for example, the International Graduate Stream, will require you to open an expression of interest profile where you would have to select your factors, and it's completely aside from Express Entry. It does not even require you to be eligible for Express Entry. So what are the provinces then that accept applications without this EOI, so without having to go through the step of registering or opening a profile with the province? As of today, we have the Ontario. So Ontario has 3 programs that work directly with Express Entry. We have the French-speaking skilled worker, the human capital priorities, and I have another one in mind that I'll remember in a second. We also have Alberta. Alberta has also another program or stream through Express Entry that also selects candidates if you are in the pool and eligible. And please keep in mind that it does not mean that because you're in the pool, the province will directly select you because they have this program. You actually also need to meet the requirements for that program. So going back to the example I gave about Ontario, if we're talking about the French-speaking skilled worker, on top of being in the pool of candidates and being eligible for Express Entry, you also need to meet, for instance, having an upper intermediate level of French, intermediate level of English, at least the bachelor's, and 1 year work experience. So we also need to meet and look into the requirements for that province. And once the province is okay, this person meets the requirements of our program and is within a score range that we're looking at, we'll invite him or her through Express Entry. Saskatchewan also has another program that works with Express Entry as well, selects candidates from there too. And British Columbia too, but this one, it does require you to have a job offer, but it still works with Express Entry, and candidates may get selected from there. There's also a couple streams also in the northern eastern part of Canada, so the Atlantic provinces that we call them. So New Brunswick also has a stream with Express Entry, and Nova Scotia as well. So Nova Scotia has actually an interesting program for Francophone speakers that will invite candidates directly through Express Entry. So to summarize this answer here, it really depends on the province and the streams and the arrangements that they have with the federal government. But we also have to look into the specific requirements for that province. So it's not only about being a candidate in the Express Entry pool and meeting the eligibility for Express Entry, but also meeting the requirements for that province. Basil, if you'd like to add to this.
So I just want to mention 2 things here based on certain developments that we have been witnessing during COVID and during 2021 as well. Most provinces are going to potentially switch to their own EOI system, or the expression of interest system, meaning applicants are going to have to create a portal, a profile in the provincial government portal, go through their monthly draws or bi-weekly draws, and then after that, they'll be able to continue their journey either through Express Entry or outside of Express Entry. Now, the reason why I'm saying this is because, interesting enough, so the Minister of Immigration pushed in a big budget for IT and digitalizing the process of immigration application to be submitted. And just a few weeks ago, a new portal has been launched by the Canadian government for PR applications that used to be paper-based. So I want you to think about it this way. If you get nominated through a PMP or a provincial program that is not under Express Entry, back in the day, when you go to step 2, which is to submit your PR application for that PMP stream, you actually had to submit that on paper. Now with this new portal, it has nothing to do with Express Entry. You actually can submit this PR application online outside of Express Entry, which wasn't even an option before. So now you go through these PMP options in Express Entry, then you do an EPR, an electronic PR application through Express Entry. And for all these PMP streams that are outside of Express Entry, now you can use the second PR portal to submit this PR application online, and you don't have to do paper-based applications. And should this be successful, what we anticipate is most streams are going to become their own provincial selection draws systems, and then after that you can submit those PR applications through this PR portal. Of course, Express Entry is very successful and it will continue doing its job with the streams, but we really don't know how the final split is going to be. But now we can see that both options are viable.
Okay, thank you. I believe we will only have time for one or two more questions before we start taking direct questions. So Basil, this one is for you. Under what conditions can one appeal a visa refusal, and what is the difference between appeal and reapplying?
Okay, so that's a good question. But before we answer it, we need to take immigration law and the act and regulations and split them into categories, right? So there's a category of applications you can actually appeal a refusal or appeal a decision about, and there's another category where no appeal procedures are applicable. So visa applications or temporary resident visa applications, so TRVs, so visitor visas, study permits, work permits, and such, these are all temporary resident status. There is no appeal process for this. So if you get a refusal, you can submit something called an ATIP, Access to Information Act and Privacy request. You go there to get the officer's notes, and then you can reapply if you get refused. Now, what you could do is something called a judicial review. Judicial review is not an appeal. This is where you say there is an administrative error that the officer committed in processing my application, and this is not fair. So I'm actually going to go to federal court, and I'm through federal court. I am going to force the immigration officers or Ircc to assign another officer to recheck my application because there was an error committed. This is what a judicial review is, but that's not an appeal. But let's say if you get refused a PR application, again, some PR applications, there is appeal process, some don't. But let's say if you are eligible for an appeal, right? This is when you go to the Immigration Appeal Division or IAD, and then you go through the entire appeal procedure. So whenever you get refused, don't take your refusal letter on face value, because some of them are pretty generic. So when you get a refusal letter and the officer tells you, I don't believe that you are going to go back home after you're done with your studies in Canada, or I don't really believe that you have enough financials to support yourself. And then you're thinking, but I submitted a bank statement with $80,000. What do you mean I don't have enough money? You need to submit an ATIP. You need to get the officer's notes. Yes, it takes around 4 to 6 weeks, a little bit more sometimes, to get that report, but you need to see what the officer wrote. Well, I checked your bank statement, but then I also looked into these large deposits that I found, and I'm not really convinced you really have that money. I think you borrowed it, or I don't think you're financially established because your monthly salary is never going to be able, it's very low, and it's not going to be able to justify the amount of money that you're spending in Canada. So the issue is not really the bank statements you're submitting, is the job reference letter that you got and the salary certificates that you submitted with your application. So to answer that is, first, you need to understand what appeal procedures are available to your application, the type of application you submitted. And if you don't have an appeal process, then you may submit an ATIP request and then get your officer's GCMS notes and read what was written in the actual notes that led to the final refusal or the final decision about your case.
Thank
Francine,
you.
let's go ahead and Maria, let's just go ahead and answer the last few questions super quick, just because I know we want to dedicate around 20 minutes for people to ask questions. So let's just take those real quick.
Okay. So this is where the case has become a bit more specific / complicated. So my brother is in the Lebanese army. He will retire after 2 years. He's 48. He has a diploma in electronic and has 15 years of experience in the same field during his work in the Lebanese army. He is married and has 1 child. Will they accumulate the needed points for immigration?
Thank you, Francine. So I'll try to address this in the fastest way possible. Just referring back to what we mentioned, case by case, I cannot really give a final answer or final recommendation right now, just because we would need to look at other factors. But looking at age and the level of education, as I can see, and again, speaking about express entry, don't limit yourself to just express entry. We may be eligible for other provincial programs, or even in this case, we could consider the federal skilled trades should a job offer be in place in Canada. So, and depending on the work experience. So, to looking at the factors that are presented, yes, we've lost points for age, actually all points, if we're looking through express entry, and the level of education doesn't really, it's not maximized because we're not at a bachelor's or master's level. To answer the question, it looks like express entry may not be the best option. We would still have to look into languages, whether your brother speaks English and French or just one language and at what level. And that's when we would actually be able to determine that score. But again, do not close your options to just express entry. We may also consider provincial programs or coming temporarily under a job offer through a work permit. But that's why we recommend and we emphasize the importance of our assessments and consultations, where we look specifically at the case, look at all the factors, and prepare scenarios with the points and expected the expected points under each scenario.
I'm gonna add real quick. So here's just because we need to wrap up and we need to hurry up in answering these questions. In less than 30 seconds, I'll just give you two super quick examples of actual solutions. So what you can do here, you know what? Study, one of the two partners, study French for 9 months, get your B2 in French, get a job offer, come to Canada on a work permit, get 1 year of experience, apply for immigration under CEC. Age is not really going to make a difference, or go through PNP. So this is one way you can do it. One of you comes to go to one of the Atlantic provinces, goes to a smaller province, studies at a public college, or does a master's or an MBA, and then the spouse is going to be able to work full-time, and then spouse becomes the principal applicant, applies under one of the PNP options, and off you go. So these are just super quick, very hypothetical options that you can do in order to counter the age factor. Of course, like Maria was saying, we have to ask a lot of questions to fully understand the details, but in terms of just there are potential solutions.
Thank you. Basil, this is a tricky one, I think. So one of the attendees asked, I'm from Pakistan and I was in the USA for 33 years living illegally. I have 3 children born in the USA. I manage my own business, again, in the USA. I got deported to Pakistan last year. I have no criminal records there. My mom is a Canadian citizen and I would like to visit her. Is it possible to be eligible to get a visa for Canada without any issues?
Yeah. So my initial answer is, well, you really need to schedule a consultation. We have to have a lot of questions answered in order for us to tell you where you stand. But I want you to think about it from this perspective. For the main issue here that this person is asking is my illegal status in the US going to be a hurdle in coming to Canada? Because I lived there illegally and then I got deported. Sure, I don't have any criminal record and all that fun stuff, but you overstayed in the US. And that potentially becomes a threat to Canada when it comes to temporary resident visa applications or temporary resident status applications. So chances of getting a visit visa to Canada might be a bit tough, but applying for immigration is different, as long as you're able to mention the circumstances that led you to be forced to live illegally in Canada and in the US. Now, there is something called HNC, humanitarian compassionate considerations, whether it is for best interest of the children, whether it is level of establishment and ties to Canada and family and friends and support systems that you have in Canada, whether it is the inadmissibility factors that led you to not being able to apply for a visa or immigration. So we would have to look into the circumstances that led this person to stay in the US illegally, and what type of pathway we can bring this person in. Of course, the fact that the mother is Canadian, the fact that the mother's is in Canada, and there is some level of ties to the country, that becomes a competitive advantage. It's just a matter of reversing what happened in the US to explain and then find the right way to reapply through the Canadian system. But we definitely need to go through the details of this person on a consultation.
Great. And finally, before we take the questions of the attendees, Maria, this is for you. Myself and my two sisters are Canadian citizens living in Montreal. We intend to bring my family and two brothers living in Lebanon. How can we do so?
Great question. And this differs a little bit from what we've been discussing today. This addresses a bit more the other very important immigration class in Canada, which is the family class. So being a Canadian citizen in Canada gives you the opportunity to sponsor certain family members who are abroad and who meet the definition of a family or of a member of the family class. In this case, this specific question, so intend to bring my family, we would have to understand what family you're referring to. If it's your spouse and your children and you're a Canadian citizen and meet the requirements as the sponsor, you would most likely be able to sponsor your spouse and children if they're dependent children as well. So there's a certain list of factors that we need to take here, but spouse and dependent children can be sponsored under sponsorship application. And if we're talking about your parents or your mother or your father back in Lebanon, we may then look into the parent and grandparent sponsorship. It is a lottery based program where you as a sponsor express your interest of wanting to sponsor your parents and grandparents. And because you mentioned your two sisters are here as well, the three of you could, and if they're citizens and meet the requirements of being sponsored, the three of you could express that interest. And it of course increases your chances. It's completely lottery system. It's not first come, first serve. It was like that in the past, but it's been lottery for a few years now. And there's only certain factors we need to consider, such as your income for the past 3 years, your family size, and of course the definition of a family member that you're trying to sponsor abroad. So there's definitely options for sponsoring your family. When it comes to your brothers, becomes a bit more tricky, and we can address this through a consultation. We would have to look at other circumstances, such as if this is the only family member you have outside, and the circumstances for your brothers themselves. So we can definitely discuss this further over a consultation, go through the details, but the family class, the sponsoring through family class, it's very interesting, and as a Canadian citizen, it gives you quite some options to sponsor your family abroad.
Thank you, Maria. And now I believe Manal and Latan, you had
I have allowed the chat option.
Yeah. Yes.
Right.
So we have two options. Okay.
So whoever.
So either you can just
add
your questions, or
Yeah. And then also whoever would like to ask a question and raise their hand, they can just be unmuted based on the order, and then we'll take it from there. And then if you just don't mind, mention who you would like to answer your question. So
Mohammed, we have Muhammad.
Go ahead. You can unmute them, Maria.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for this long explanation about everything almost. My question is, what about if I graduated as a master's degree, but I've been working in another hobby, if you want to say, I don't have a certificate regarding this or diploma for this hobby? Okay, if you want, I can give a specific example, or we can answer this question. So
pretty much what you're saying, Muhammad, is your education is not really related to the field of work experience that you've had. Is that correct? I think this is pretty much what you're saying. So
yes, I have experience in my graduation, but I've worked in another field. also.
Okay, cool. So what's nice about the Canadian immigration system is your education doesn't really have to be related to, they call it the NOC, the National Occupational Classification of the job that you're holding. What does that mean? As long as you meet the education requirements and the work experience requirements for the NOC, then you're eligible to claim work experience in that NOC. So if you graduated with a master's or an MBA, but you had a hobby and you did, let's say, you became an athlete, right? And the NOC for you to be an athlete has certain requirements, and you do have you meet these requirements. Sometimes it's just high school, sometimes saying there's specific certifications you have to take, some sort of prerequisites you have to meet. If you meet that NOC requirements, your education doesn't have to really be tied to the experience that you've done, and it's totally fine. So in your case, just take the work experience that you've done in the past 10 years, or since the age of 18, whichever is shorter, and then look at the NOCs of the experience that you've had, and look at the requirements of that NOC, and whatever it is that technically, from a Canadian perspective, you're eligible for, you can claim work experience for these positions, even though your education was under a different field. Is there somebody else who had their hand raised? I don't know if Manal
yes, Manal, but she texted them. So
okay.
She has two questions. The first one is she heard that she can apply with a donation certificate from a parent or a brother or maybe a friend for proof of fund. Is this true? So this is the first question. Maria or Basil, who would like to answer this?
Okay, Maria, I'll take this one and you take the second question.
Perfect.
So what Manal is referring to when it comes to a donation certificate is a gift certificate. So the definition of a gift certificate is an irrevocable transaction that is not conditioned or based on anything else. What does that mean? You're not borrowing money from your mom, let's say, or from your parent, from your brother. You're being gifted something. So let's assume your parent gifts you something, and we can give you certain templates so you understand how this goes. You have to get an irrevocable gift certificate from your mom to say, I'm gifting you this $20,000 and I don't want this money back. Do it as you please. This addresses one part, which is where you got this money from. Then you take this gift certificate and then you deposit this money and you put it in your bank account. If the money stays there for 6 months, and then you get 6 month statement to show that the money has been in your possession for 6 months without any large transactions, then you don't have to show the source of funds prior to your mom or your brother giving you this money, meaning bank statement for 6 months and the gift certificate that your mom gave you, and that's it. But let's assume you got the money just last week, and you show your bank statement, and the bank statement is for 6 months, but you only have maintained this balance for 1 month. You need to show where your mom or your brother got the money from. As in, they didn't go rob a bank and then give it to me, right? Oh, they got it from their salary. You have to show where their source of funds is. So the short answer is 6 months bank certificate, 6 months bank statement showing the money has been in your possession plus a gift certificate, that's enough. Or 6 months, 1 month bank statement, the gift certificate from the person who gave you the money, and where they got their money from. They sold a car, they sold a property, it's money it's money's been accumulating from their salary, etc., etc. Source of funds is crucial when it comes to such transactions. But to answer Manal's questions, 100% allowed, totally fine. And we do have success cases in those, and then we did get approvals on those cases.
Okay, for her next question, if she already applied to Quebec, PNP or Express Entry, I believe she meant when will she have to give up on getting actually an invitation, or when will she know that she will not be invited to apply?
Great question.
Uh,
Important to understand how long your profile is valid for. Express entry is valid for 1 year, or if your language test expire before the year, then your profile will automatically expire. So keep in mind the validity of your language exams and your ECA, so your credentials. Now, when you have to give up, that's a tough question, but I'd like to think about in a way that you need to do some research or consult with someone with experience. What has been the trend for the invitation? So what has been the selection score? Where are you sitting as of today with your score? You know, if we're sitting with a score of 370 points and we look at the previous draws, we can see that the likelihood of getting invited is actually quite low because the draws have been between the 470s, 480s for the federal skilled worker program. So we can look at it, first of all, from the perspective of the points. But also into the provincial programs, no? So when to give up? Don't give up if you think you can do more. And let me explain this a little bit more. If we can push our score further, whether that it's through, let's say, the Saskatchewan provincial program or directly through Express Entry through your CRS score, aim for that push, whether that's it through the French, if you can acquire an upper intermediate level of French, or acquire more years of work experience, or even English in this case, if it's your primary language. We would advise you to look into what's the maximum potential that you have, and then you can decide whether that's realistic for you. Because you know, we're sitting at a score for 300, let's say 300 points, and you know yourself that we've lost some points for age, and we cannot really compensate with languages because you do not want to retake the language exam, or it's just hard to get to that level. Then we'll have to look into other options if your goal is really immigration, through a temporary residence. So it's very important to look at, well, with my circumstances, my age, my studies and my experience, can I really maximize my score through languages and get selected through that? If that's the case, then don't give up in that sense. Try to work towards achieving that score. But if you believe that these circumstances cannot be fixed, and you know, age is really against us, a factor against us in these circumstances, then we'll have to look into the temporary route and come in either as a student or as a worker to later apply through a provincial program or the CEC. Basil, if you like to add anything to that, please go ahead.
I'll add two things real quick here. First thing is first, Manal, when you say the word applied, I need you to understand then that you really didn't apply, because you did not really submit an application here. You have done something called an EOI. You expressed your interest. You showed your interest. It's like you submitting your resume to the government. It doesn't really mean that you submitted an application. Now, what's interesting about this is by showing your interest, this interest is dynamic, meaning your Express Entry profile is going to be open for 1 year. You can update it as your circumstances change. And if it expires, you can open another one. And as long as your language exams are still valid, you can have another Express Entry profile open for 1 year. Some provinces, they allow you to keep your profile open for 6 months, and some they allow you to keep it open for 1 year. One of our clients started their Express Entry profile with 385 points, and within 6 months they have now 510 points, right? It's not us who did this. We advised them, like Maria was saying, is since the beginning, this is what you need to do, so no problem, put yourself in the system, but you have to redo your TOEFL exam, you have to equalize your master's because you only did an ECA for your bachelor's, you do this and this and that. And then 6 months later, we were able to update their profile. And then by doing that, certain factors that we were focusing on since the beginning with the client, they jumped up almost 100 points by having a combination of CLB 9, which is advanced level of English, plus intermediate level of French, which got them 50 points bonus. And then with a master's and 3 year of experience, they got another 50. So they went from 385 to 500 and some, just because they redid a couple of language exams, and then they did an ECA for an MBA or a master's, I don't recall. So never give up when it comes to expression of interest. Like Maria was saying, there's 1,000 different ways to do things. And if you start a profile, it doesn't mean you're stuck with it. You can always update it and renew it as your circumstances change.
I believe Muhammad has another question, which is he already did his WES and he's waiting for his TCF results. When is the best time to start the consultation to create the best track for immigration, or I believe the best pathway for it?
Yeah, do you want to take this?
Sure. Yeah. So we've been discussing a lot about planning ahead, looking into the potential combinations, your score, assuming that we're going through express entry. So I see you're done with the WES, which we know we can take quite some time. Waiting for TCF results, we know it's also lengthy. So just hold on there, they'll come. When is the best time? Honestly, anytime now. Just because there's a lot of preparation beforehand that goes with, well, this is what we have right now. This is what the government is currently selecting. Do we fall under this score range? And it's better for you to plan this from the very beginning instead of waiting to receive, you know, all the documents. Because what if the results comes and we don't meet quite that score? Well, we could already start beforehand preparing for that ideal score. So we'll be sharing in a second a slide with our contact details where you can reach out to us. But to be very honest, anytime now, reach out, send us your specific case, your circumstances, and we'll look at it from now. And even if you don't have the TCF results yet, we can already start planning ahead based on your age, your work experience, and that WES. What would be the ideal score that we need to meet there?
Hamid, I also want you to think about this, us or anybody else. It's not an on and off switch, meaning there's something called immigration consulting, and there's something called visa services, and there's something called immigration services. Not every single person needs all these three. Some people, they come and they pay for our consultation services for us to guide them, to let them know what they need to do, you know, explain things to them, we answer all their questions, and off they go on to do things on their own, right? So that's mainly for planning, or if they get stuck in the middle of the process, or they're facing challenges or whatever it is. So you can potentially, and we always advise to do this before you even think about applying for immigration, because you need to know what you need to do, what your homework is, in order for you to achieve something. So that potentially you can start from now. Second part is when it comes to visa services, again, depends on your consultation, then you're going to either go through the immigration route or you're going to go through the visa route. So if you get a study permit, a work permit, you're going to be changing your status or whatever it is. And there's a huge misconception when it comes to visa services, as in, oh, I can only apply for a visa outside in my home country or online or whatever it is. And you know, consultants and lawyers, they can only help me with immigration in Canada, which is not true. We can actually process the visa applications for you online and represent you from Canada for you to be able to finalize the process locally where you're at. So I don't know if you're going to require any visa services or not, but this is something you can also consider. And then the last thing is when it comes to immigration services, here it gets split into two things: provincial nominee program, expression of interest, and provincial nominee applications, so EOIs and PNP applications. The second part is, let's say, the ARIMA or the express entry profiles, expression of interest, and then after that, the PR application based on the invitation to apply you're going to be receiving in these systems. And again, it's not an on and off switch. There's no such thing as, oh, you must get all these things in order for you to be able to work with us. No, it depends on what you need, right? You just need to be consulted, finish things on your own. Maybe you already know you're halfway through the process. It's just a matter of somebody helping you with your procedures. Maybe you already created your own express entry profile. You just need somebody to check your documents for you. Maybe you just, you know what, just take my entire process from A to Z and you guys do what you do best because you have expertise. So it's up to you. And this is why we always, remind our clients is we have something called milestones. We have project plans internally. We have a big team that supports our caseworkers to see which part of the process and what are the deadlines that are out there. So what you need is based on your own personal circumstances. But if you're referring to consultations, my advice is always, like Maria was saying, is start with that, know where you're at and what you need to do in order for you to prepare for it. Are there any more questions?
Thank you. No, I think it's time to wrap up.
Okay.
So thank you, Basil and Maria, for your valuable responses, and thanks to everyone who attended today's session and sent their questions. Some of them were not answered because of the time. However, we will have more Q&A sessions scheduled in the near future, and we will do our best to post those questions in our blog on our website. Now, for those who would like to book a consultation and have a personalized detailed immigration report, whether it's for PR, for the skilled worker, PNP, or even temporary residency, please feel free to visit our website on www.incubate.ca. You can click on schedule consultation here to book your consultation, or you can just feel free to contact us on our WhatsApp number or email us on connect@incubate.ca.
Thank you. And
yes.
I see that Lathan is still here and just out of respect, just because they've managed to stay with us for an hour and a half. Lathan, do you have any question, or would you like to ask your question, considering that you did raise your hand early? Or would you like to type it in the chat box? No. Okay. So Lathan, if you have any questions, go ahead and ask it now, or type it in the chat box. We will wait just a few seconds. Just now, I know that you've waited to answer your question. So if not, we will go ahead and end the session. Other than that, thank you all. Thank you, Maria, so much. Thanks, Rita, and thanks, Francine, for assisting us in the webinar. And hopefully, we'll have another one very soon. Take care all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.